Everybody, welcome in to the latest episode of the Dribble Drive podcast. I am your host, Austin Render. If you're watching us, if you're listening to us on the podcast form, thanks so much for spending some of your time with us. We really appreciate it. I want to remind you and thank those who have already done this, but like and subscribe to us on YouTube under the Back Home Again, or the Back Home Network YouTube page. Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast. You can find us anywhere there. Leave a review, leave a rating. We love to know how we're doing. Download the episode. That kind of stuff allows us to know that we've got an audience that is really enjoying our show. We've loved the interaction we've had so far with our listeners. I want to start by kind of going back a little bit. We've had some Big Ten women's basketball news in the most recent cycle. I want to go back through, kind of hit on some of the things going on in the conference. We'll start with a couple of days ago at the ESPYs. A couple of Big Ten athletes came away with ESPY awards. Caitlin Clark, the best college athlete in women's sports. Juju Watkins won the best breakthrough athlete at the ESPYs. This is going to be a whole smorgasbord of things going on here. Mackenzie Holmes is back at IU as a graduate manager. She'll spend the year rehabbing. She's on the Seattle Storm, but she is out all season with a knee injury, so she's rehabbing, and she's going to spend that time as a graduate manager with IU. Lucy Olson of Iowa, the Villanova transfer, named as a member of the USA Basketball 3x3 Women's U23 Nations League team. So a good opportunity there for Lucy Olson. And I know a lot of people are excited, myself included, to see her in the Big Ten. Incoming Michigan freshman Silas Swords is now going to play for Canada in the Olympics. She'll be the second Olympian in Michigan history and the youngest player to ever play in the Olympics for Canada women's basketball at 18 years old. So very cool thing for Michigan and for Silas Swords to get some experience before heading to Ann Arbor. Wisconsin announced it's heading to the Cancun Challenge this coming November with Providence, San Diego State, and VCU for their kind of Thanksgiving tournament. USC announced a home-and-home with Notre Dame. Boy, that'll be a really fun couple of games there over the next couple of seasons. And a good segue point here into our guest who's going to join us here in just a minute. How about former Minnesota star Rachel Banham, who hit a WNBA record 8 3-pointers off the bench in a game Sunday against Phoenix. So very cool stuff going on all around the conference. And with that segue, we bring in our guest here, Justin Gaard of the Gopher Radio Network. Justin, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate having you on the show here. How's your summer going?
It's going well. It's halfway done. I was just explaining to my 9-year-old before we hit record. He was asking me about some basketball camp that was coming up, and he said, "That's already next week." I said, "Yeah, man, summer's pretty much over. So enjoy the time that you can." But it's great to be talking hoops. And you mentioned Rachel Banham. We were at the Lynx game yesterday because Caitlin Clark was in town, and Nafisa Collier's hurt for the Lynx, so they don't have kind of their full deck right now. But we were all looking and watching Rachel Banham with those 8 3-pointers for Connecticut and thinking, it's too bad they couldn't figure out a way to keep her with the Lynx. She's been with them the last 3 or 4 years, and they could have used her any of those 3-pointers yesterday against Caitlin Clark in that group because they ended up losing to the Fever. But it's good to be with you, man. Thanks for doing this.
It's cool. I go through all the Big Ten social media accounts, kind of getting ready for this, seeing what's going on. And there are so many Big Ten players starring in the WNBA right now. And it's so cool to see that. So cool to see the social media accounts kind of grabbing all those highlights and clipping all those. Well, for those who may be unaware, maybe we've got our other Big Ten listeners who don't know exactly your background and where you've come from. Kind of explain how you've gotten to your position through the broadcasting world and kind of what you do for Minnesota.
Sure. It start with my main job, which is working at KFAN Radio, 100.3 FM. It's the sports radio station in town, and I've been with them for almost 21 years now. So I gave my youth. You're going through your youth right now, Austin. I gave my youth to the Fan and the Fan Radio Network. So I started there in 2003-ish, Labor Day 2003. And just kind of hung around and worked my way up. So I'm the producer of the Afternoon Drive Show with Dan Barrero. Dan's a Hall of Fame broadcaster here in Minnesota. He's been on the air at the Fan for almost 30 years, I want to say, probably more than 30 years. And about 10 or 11 years ago, actually closer to 15 now, we became the flagship rights holder for Gopher Sports. So I started on the football sidelines in 2011 and have been doing that ever since with Mike Grimm and Daryl Thompson. We've had a lot of fun doing that. And then I guess this is year 4 now on the women's hoops side. The longtime women's hoops broadcaster, Corby Status, moved on to call St. Thomas University of St. Thomas games when they went Division I. So opened up a job for me here. I was lucky enough to get it, and now I'm entering year 4 as women's hoops broadcaster, and it's just been a ton of fun. And I think it's going to be an exciting season for the Gophers. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit, but it's been fun to work with Coach Plitzuweit and her staff now entering year 2. And it's just been kind of a cool thing. I'm from Minnesota, so I've never had to move. I've never had to really go anywhere, which is helpful. And so I've been really lucky.
So I know we've talked about this, but I guess I never put all the pieces together that we came in at the same time. We're both going into year 4 here with our respective programs, which is cool. And
well, one of the years that we weren't allowed to talk, really, right? Well, I mean, you could see us, but we had masks on. Like, I think my first year we were still doing masks. When we were in Bloomington, remember, there were no fans allowed because you guys couldn't handle the storm. All the Minnesota people are like, where are the plows? This is no big deal. What's the issue? So, yeah, you kind of forget where you meet people and how many conversations you've had. But yeah, we're the new guys.
Gosh, what a day that was. It was the year after the cardboard cutout. So like fans were coming to games.
Yeah, we were excited to see the crowd. Yeah.
But then we got this giant snowstorm and I made the mistake of saying, "Oh, I'll go to shoot around and then I'll come back and change and then I'll go to the game." Well, when I came back home to kind of eat a snack and get changed, I got stuck on the uphill incline into my apartment complex and basically parked my car on the side of the road. So I was like, I should have just stayed there. And then I had players tell me after that game that they could hear me when they were at the free throw line, which was wonderful.
Yep. It's always scary when it's very quiet. No one's there, what you're saying, how loud you're saying it. And, you know, Assembly Hall is like the perfect broadcast spot for us where we are. At least I think it is. But yeah, you're very close. You're right behind the bench. So you can definitely, if no one's there, you're going to stand out a little bit.
Correct. Yeah, they could absolutely hear us. Well, let's talk some Minnesota basketball. That's what the fans want here as we bring you on. And let's start kind of back maybe a year ago now. Minnesota makes the hiring of Dawn Plitzuweit coming over from West Virginia. When you kind of heard about the hire, you got to meet her in the offseason. What were some of the expectations when you kind of got this new regime in there? What was the feeling going into 23-24 for Minnesota?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of friends over in South Dakota, obviously, because we're pretty close. So that was the first thing I did was call over there because she had a great run in the Summit League. You know, they won a couple of regular season titles. They won the tournament title. You know, the reason she got the West Virginia job was because they went to the Sweet 16, had a really close game with Michigan. And if you still bring that up with the staff, it still bothers them that they weren't able to beat the Wolverines in the Sweet 16. But they knocked off Baylor in Baylor. And so that kind of put Dawn Plitzuweit on the national map. And so I called over to South Dakota just to kind of see, what we'd be working with here, for first of all, for our purposes, media wise, which she's been great. Her staff has been great, but just what type of coach she is. And it didn't take you long, Austin, to see that it's good. They're going to defend really hard. They're going to rebound. They're going to be tough. They're going to take care of the ball. Like all the things that every coaching cliche that would apply that they all say, that's what they do. And so there was a lot of excitement because really wherever she's been, they've won. They went to the tournament at West Virginia in her only year there. I mentioned the success at South Dakota. So when the move from Lindsay Whalen was made, I think a lot of people were surprised because I think they thought she was going to get, at least some people, maybe one more year with this group of recruits that she had just brought in that were all playing as freshmen. And I know we'll talk about them because they're now all juniors now. But when you peeled it back and saw the coach that they had an opportunity to get and kind of that culture and that program that were coming in here, it started to make a lot of sense why they wanted to make the move when they did to try to lure Dawn Plitzuweit away because she's obsessed with winning the next game. That's the best way I can describe it. She has one hobby. It's how do we continue to move the program forward, but also how do we win this next game? And so it was fun. It was fun to kind of see that take hold through the first part of last season.
Yeah, it was a heck of a start for Minnesota. You had a loss to UConn, but outside of that, it was just red hot, playing really well, even took it into the beginning of Big Ten play as well. And like you said, it was just a different style, a different culture that she established there. Obviously, Mara Braun goes down and the whole season changes. But before the injury, what was working so well for this team that all of a sudden had them kind of right on the bubble, maybe on the right side of the bubble in some projections of an NCAA tournament team by January?
Yeah, I say this to a lot of people, and I said this to a lot of people at the end of last season, kind of as it was coming to an end. In mid-January, I think they're 14-4. They had just knocked off a Michigan State team that had come in, somewhere in the net rankings, like top 15 or top 20. They had a win over Nebraska. they just had really played well. And to answer your question, it was the defense, it was the rebounding, it was the attention to detail, it was the lack of turnovers. What had killed this team, the previous couple of years was just the turnovers. I mean, they'd average 18, 19 turnovers a game, and it's just in the Big Ten, you just can't win that way. And they've done a really good job of cleaning all of that up. And so they beat Michigan State at Williams Arena on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. Mallory Heyer had a big game. It was a double-double. They're sitting there at 14-4, I think, maybe 14-3, and winning record in the Big Ten with a couple of really high net wins. And so you mentioned it. They were in the NCAA tournament. I mean, it was if things just kind of went normal, they were probably going to be a 7, 8, or 9 seed. They're probably middle of the pack Big Ten, which for year one with Dawn, with the young roster, would have been great. And the Mara injury changed everything. I mean, she was that important. Their hope is that she doesn't have to be as important this year with some of the newcomers and transfers that we'll talk about. But, she was their leading scorer. She was kind of the point person on the defense. She just commands so much attention. And she was really the one gopher a year ago that could get her own shot consistently. And so they really struggled offensively, once she was out of the lineup, and she came back for the WNIT, got hurt again. They were able to kind of still find their way in the WNIT finals before losing to St. Louis. But really, if you want to mark the season, it was kind of when Mara was healthy and when Mara was injured. And that shows you how important she was to the team. So the hope is, like I said, that they're not going to rely so much on her, that they can still continue to be competitive. If something happens again, she seems to be healthy right now, which is a good sign. She's not playing the 3-on-3 stuff that you mentioned that Lucy Olson is. She was a part of that group the last couple of years. So she's not doing that, I think, in an effort just to make sure that she's healthy for the season. But it was an exciting start to the year, no doubt. And I'll never forget walking out of that Michigan State game, because they were really hot, thinking, wow, this is actually happening here pretty quickly. They're putting this thing together pretty quickly. And then Mara got hurt 2 games later, and the season changed for good.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of these wins that I forgot about how good Minnesota was playing. You go to Michigan January 9th and win 82-66, just a total domination.
Yep.
Then you host Nebraska the next game, you win by 4. They were receiving votes at the time. You came to Indiana, and I think that game was closer than the score indicates. I think, if I remember correctly, Indiana pulled away at the end, but I don't remember ever feeling all that comfortable in that game. And then Michigan State, like you said, 69-50, just a complete domination. But then that was when the wheels fell off and the losing streak began. But man, were those it wasn't as if you were beating teams that didn't have a whole lot of standing in the Big Ten. You're beating a team that in Michigan that ends up being a number 6 seed in the tournament and beats Indiana.
Right.
And an NCAA tournament team. You're beating Nebraska, who goes to the Big Ten championship. They're an NCAA tournament team. You beat Michigan State, the 4 seed. They go to the NCAA tournament. These were good wins. Like, the resume was really building.
Yeah, it was.
And I know that's the bummer of the whole thing. Is there a spin, though, in the way of, like, yeah, it stunk the way the season, the regular season at least, finished, but now you bring almost everybody back. And they all got this opportunity kind of to have a little bit of an extra load on their shoulders while Mara was out. So can that play to Dawn's advantage coming up here this season, to where she's got a team that now has more experience having to do more because of the injury to Mara Braun?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what they're hoping. And you reminded me of the Michigan State score. What stood out about that was they held them to 50. I think Michigan State averaged about 80 points a game last year. Like they
right around that.
That was by far their lowest total. I don't think they got any further than that. And they just locked them down. But that's why I think a lot of people were, regardless of what happened a year ago, I mean, just the fact that everybody, all 5 starters are back from a year ago. A year ago, they're starting a junior, 3 sophomores, and a freshman. They're all coming back. As you know, because I always joked and I always laughed, like, it's just such a ridiculous time to be a young team in the Big Ten because of all the different, COVID years and super seniors. And I would always joke, I think about like Grace Berger or Mackenzie Holmes or like even Sarah Scalia, right, who used to be a Gopher. Like, you write down on your boards like how many career starts they have, and they'd have like 150 starts, right? Same with Iowa, right? Caitlin Clark, Kate Martin, Gabby Marshall. You're like, not only do they have 127 starts each, they all have them together. Like, it's going to be hard. Mallory Heyer leads the Gophers in starts. I think she's in the 50s now. Don't quote me on that. Maybe 60 with the WNIT. Like, she's the leader. Like, she'd be like 6 or 7 on some of these teams that had been at the top of the Big Ten. So it was a really hard time to be young in the Big Ten. That's why the start of last season was encouraging. But to full circle it to your original question, this was the hope with this group, right? Especially with the 4 sophomores as part of the top 10, or 4 juniors now as part of the top 10 recruiting classes. When they get older, theoretically, they should be in the mix to make an NCAA tournament, to be in the top half of the Big Ten and all of those things. So to have, Mara and Amaya battle, Mallory Heyer back, Nia Holloway, who was injured her freshman year, she'll be an important player off the bench. Sophie Hart, their starting center a year ago, now back for her second season, and Grace Grocholski, who I think had a great freshman year, started every game. They should feel pretty good about themselves, I would think. Now the Big Ten, as I always say, they don't care about your problems. They don't care about your, any issues you have. The Big Ten's not interested. They're not worried about it. It's still obviously going to be a ridiculous league, especially with the teams that are coming in. But yep. I know they're excited about. I know they feel a lot better this year at this time than they did last year at this time, just with what they think they can possibly do.
Well, and that's part of it too. It almost felt like up through mid-January, Minnesota was maybe overachieving just a little bit. And then obviously the floor gave out. But now you kind of see what you've got, what you can be with a team that's now a year older with more experience. And like you said, it's hard to be young right now. It's hard to be a rebuilding team in the Big Ten because, or really in college basketball, because of the transfer portal. Like it's just so hard to rebuild. But especially in the Big Ten, it's as deep as it's ever been. We're adding 4 more teams that are certainly capable of adding to that, to have 2 top 10 teams in the country. So it doesn't get a whole lot easier. But you mentioned some of those names: Amaya Battle, Grace Grocholski, Sophie Hart, Mallory Heyer. What did you see from them while Mara Braun was gone that kind of showed, okay, there's some growth there? Okay, you've seen them come, especially the sophomores, now juniors, that kind of class, and what they showed you while she was out.
Well, I'd say to pinpoint one player that I think really took a jump, it was Amaya Battle. And, she was one that really struggled with turnovers, her freshman season. And I think I don't have the numbers directly in front of me. And I don't even know if we counted them towards the end of the season. I can't remember, but when she has 3 or fewer turnovers, the Gophers are really hard to beat. They're really good. Because her assist numbers are always going to be high. She's always going to be pretty good in the rebounds. And she was the one Gopher, probably besides Mara, that could create on her own and get her own shot. And that's really what she did down the stretch. And the Big Ten tournament game where they beat Rutgers, she had over 30. It was 32 or 34, and she essentially just took that game over and was unstoppable. Like that's the hope for Amaya Battle. Not obviously to score 30 a game, but be someone that's going to keep the turnovers low, that's going to run the offense the way that they want it to be run. And then if she needs to just say, bleep it, I'm going, she can get to the rim. She's got a great pull-up jumper. She really fixed her shot in the offseason. We mentioned Rachel Banham to start this whole conversation. Rachel was on the coaching staff before she moved on to Connecticut, and they basically spent the entire summer together and spring kind of working on her shot and recreating her shot, and it really helped out. And so she's expanded her game to now where she's a confident three-point shooter, but she was probably the one that really took the biggest jump both times Mara got hurt. As I mentioned, she was hurt in the regular season. She got hurt in the North Dakota State WNIT game at Williams Arena, like on the last play of the game. And Amaya had to step back in and kind of be that creator again. So she took the biggest jump, I would say. The rest of the pieces that we mentioned, I don't think necessarily get their own shot type of players. Mallory Heyer is one of my favorite players to watch because I feel like every good team has a Mallory Heyer, someone who's always rim running the floor, is going to get every rebound that's in the vicinity, that's going to hit the shots that are presented to her. She had a streak of 20 plus games making a 3-pointer, which for kind of a 4 player is a little bit rare. But so they all kind of had to figure out how to move around without Mara, and I'd say Amaya was probably the one that took the biggest jump.
Yeah, Amaya, I noticed the same thing in the Big Ten tournament. She was so good. Even in the Michigan game that Minnesota would go on to lose, I felt like she was assertive. You could tell that she had confidence that maybe she didn't have before the injury, and she just looked like a different player. The WNIT run ultimately comes up 1 game shy in the championship, but I know Mara got hurt again in the WNIT, but how much does that help a young team like this getting, 4, 5, 6 extra games there on the end of your schedule? That's more practice time. That's more games. I just always remember in 2018, when Indiana made the run and won the WNIT. Now, there were some older players on that team like Tyra Buss and Amanda Cahill, but like Grace Berger and some of the younger players on that team, they finally experienced what it was like to win. And I'm curious if you felt that from the WNIT run of, okay, this is bonus practice, this is bonus playing, they're learning how to win, they're learning how to win in a tournament format. Do you feel like that could really springboard them this year?
I do, and I think it's mostly just because of the competitiveness. Like you have to learn how to win in interesting environments, and the WNIT was interesting because it's a really long story, too long for this podcast. But as you know, like sometimes WNIT sites and game times are all dependent on if the arenas are available. And so like after the NDSU game, Williams Arena was essentially not available because they had some other stuff coming back. So they had to go on the road, and they had to go to Wyoming, and then they had to go to Troy. And I couldn't even go on the trip because of my main job after North Dakota State. So it was like, and because when the games were, I wasn't going to be able to get back to where I needed to be for something. So Tanner Hoops, who fills in for us on a million different things, went. But they went, Austin, from like Wyoming to the Denver airport to the Atlanta airport, driving down to Troy, then hopping back, somehow getting to St. Louis. They couldn't play at St. Louis for some reason. It was like a neutral site game in Edwardsville. It was a crazy week. And so not just like getting to the finals, but just kind of going through all of that. And I even remember UCLA a couple of years ago trying to get to Brookings, South Dakota to play in the WNIT, and they talked about how they had to figure all that stuff out. Like just that whole experience, I think we just got to figure out a way. Dawn Plitzuweit always talks about find a way is kind of her mantra for the program, is we're just going to find a way to do it. And they did that all the way into the finals. And it was, I think they just kind of ran out of gas. They were playing 5 or 6 players, a lot of travel, the whole thing, but just, not letting the circumstances dictate how they were going to compete, how are they going to play. They're playing in Troy, Alabama, in front of 3,000 people that are, I don't think a lot of Gopher fans made that trip. You know what I mean? Besides some of the parents. Yeah. So it was a unique deal. It was a unique experience. And I think definitely just the going through it and the competitive part of it, I think is really going to help them.
Yeah. It's almost like they were getting a little prerequisite into all the travel that may go into being in the Big Ten in the coming years.
For sure. You mentioned the Indiana run. We would always talk about that too, that banner, like at Assembly Hall, like with all the new ones, right, with the Big Ten titles and the NCAA tournaments, like the WNIT one's there, and like that is a very clear point, I think, of like you started here and then boom, you see where it can go if you've got the right people, if you've got the right people in there, so to speak. So I do think that's something that everybody looks at.
Yeah, there's something about just winning. It doesn't matter where it is. If it's in the especially for a young team and a new coach, it's different if maybe you're in a longer regime, but she's still establishing her culture. She's still establishing her style of play, and to get 6 extra games added on, plus a lot of wins in there, I think that's a very positive thing moving forward. You mentioned some of the transfers, some of the freshman class you guys have added there. I've said this a lot on this podcast. I'm always surprised now at how many interconference transfers there are all of a sudden. And Minnesota's got their hands on a couple of them. Annika Stewart from Nebraska and Taylor Woodson from Michigan. Alexia Davis from UMass also in that mix as well. And then a very solid freshman class that includes a top 100 recruit, McKenna Johnson. And you could even throw like Kennedy Click in that as well. And the fact that she missed her whole freshman season with an injury. So she feels like an incoming freshman as well. Adding to an already very good core that returns from the last couple of seasons, there has to be a lot of excitement in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I think there is definitely. And to talk about the transfers first, I think they fit very specific roles. Annika Stewart, is local. And both of those you mentioned, the interconference thing, those are both Minnesota kids that are coming home. Annika's from Wayzata, actually played with Mara in high school a little bit. Taylor Woodson's from Hopkins here, which is a power program, played with Amaya Battle in high school. So that was the theme. And I do wonder if you're going to see that a lot too, is just players coming home. The men's team here has seen that as well. But Taylor is a former top 60 player who's just tough, played at Michigan. which has done, I think, a pretty good job of recruiting some Minnesota kids here. The Minneapolis to Detroit Delta thing is not helping Gopher programs really on anybody's side. It's not helping Minnesota in any sport that we're so accessible with MSP Airport. I wish we were in Bloomington, right, where we would, it was an hour and from a major airport and all those things. But so Taylor Woodson coming home is great. Yeah, it's good to keep the pipeline from the Hopkins program and the Wayzata program, quite frankly, open, because they're always going to have players. They're always going to have people. Those are the players and teams that are coming to the games to watch the Gophers. So I'm excited to see what she has to bring. She's a really good defender, which means she'll get some minutes with Dawn. When you can guard, you can play, and that's what Taylor Woodson's good at. She's tough, she's rugged, she's physical, and probably just didn't have the opportunity that she wanted at Michigan, and so she's coming back here. And Stewart, I think, is going to be a good fit behind Sophie Hart at the 5. And I don't know that for sure, but I assume that's what's going to happen, and that's something that they kind of had trouble piecing together last year, is when Sophie Hart's on the bench, who's that 5 going to be? They had a freshman who I thought got better as the year went on. She ended up transferring out. So I think they're deeper than they were a year ago, which we already kind of talked about, how they struggled to really kind of go deep in the bench at times a year ago. I think they've got that fortified. And then the freshman that you speak of, McKenna Johnson, a top 60 kid from Wisconsin, who's a great shooter. She actually joined the team in January a year ago, so she's got she's got basically half a season and a full off season under their belt of just practicing and seeing exactly how they want to do things, exactly how they want to use her. And Tori McKinney comes from a great program, a state championship program here in Minnetonka, actually where I live, and is an unbelievable defender. Great rebounder. Her offense, I think, is sneakier than people think as well. And she fit in on a championship team at Minnetonka that has a lot of studs, that had a lot of good players, including Aaliyah Crump, who just committed to Texas here recently, a 5-star in this upcoming recruiting class. And she was a huge piece to their puzzle, with a bunch of stars and a lot of stuff going on in the team at all times. If you have a ton of talent, Tori was just this really solid defense first type player and kind of a stabilizer for them. So I would expect her to make an impact too right away, mostly because she can defend so well.
Yeah, it's exciting, certainly. And there's a lot going on. I never thought about airports. That's an interesting, there you go.
Yeah.
It's too easy to get out of Minneapolis to go other places, is what you're saying, I think.
Well, it's both. It depends on how you frame it. It's also easy to get here.
That's true.
If you need to get here, and I always talk about my job because I have a few. I don't know if I could do it if not for Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. I don't usually have to connect anywhere. I can get where I need to go, so it's important. Except West Lafayette and Bloomington. Indiana doesn't want me for some reason. I spend so much time in Indy in the Indy airport, which is great, very easy, But yeah, I spend a lot of time there.
We're about an hour. Yeah, it takes about an hour to get to the airport from here. So yeah, it works out in the end, but it does require some effort. There's no doubt about that. I try to say this beforehand with everybody we've had on, with Mike and with Dalton, that and I'm sure you're the same way. We haven't seen our teams yet. So when we talk about these incoming transfers, these incoming freshmen, we're talking about what we've seen from them in the past. We're saying they could be this, they could be that. We don't really know yet.
Right.
So when you say, I think she'll be the 5, we understand, there's only so much we know at this stage. It is still July. But what are kind of the expectations? Is the expectation for Minnesota in 24-25 to be a tournament team? Is the expectation for them to play in March Madness come March?
Yes. Want me to expand? I would say yes.
Go ahead and expand if you'd like to.
Yeah, I would say yes. And the advantage is, yes, absolutely. That's what all of them want. That's why we mentioned the junior class now. That's why they came here, is to put Minnesota in that conversation consistently for the first time. And we always talk about banners. If you look at the banners in Williams Arena, there's not a ton, right? There's the Lindsay Whalen era as a player, and a couple of years after that where they were kind of consistently in the tournament, Sweet 16s, things like that. Relative to other programs, there's not a ton of that, proud tradition, rich tradition, I guess. There's been a lot of good players that have come through here, but that consistent, sustained success, I don't think they've had that. That's what this group wants to do. And the advantage is, if you kind of handle your business in the non-conference, which, as we mentioned a year ago, they did, and they beat a couple of tournament teams in the non-conference as well, including Drake, which is always, which I thought was a good win considering Drake had beaten the Gophers a couple of years ago. The Big Ten is going to give you opportunities. The Big Ten is going to give you opportunities to get your metrics where they need to be, to get your strength of schedule where they need to be, to get you the confidence where it needs to be. If you can knock off some of those teams, we talked about it, and beating Nebraska and beating Michigan State and beating Michigan on the road, like those are the types of wins that get you into the NCAA tournament. And it is only going to get tougher, as we know. And we always joked about that. Like, everybody talks about the football side of the realignment, but it's like USC and UCLA coming in here, and with Oregon too. It's like, that's tough, right? But it's great because I think it's great that we're going to have those matchups. And I think it's great that we're going to get to see those players. So you're going to have your opportunities to get the wins that you need to get to find yourself in that March discussion. But I don't think anybody, I'm sure, it's not like I've spoken to them about it. It's not like they've been public about it, but I would assume they're all thinking this is the first step to get back into March Madness and get into the NCAA tournament. I would imagine that's what they're all thinking.
I would agree with that. And the home and away for Minnesota is Wisconsin. That's the one team they'll play twice. You get to host teams like Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Illinois. Those are all very good wins if you can get them at home, and helpful to have them at home for sure. You got to make the LA trip to UCLA, USC, some other notables like Maryland, defending Big Ten champion Ohio State. Yep. When you saw the home away split, did you have any thoughts on it? Or do you know, kind of like me, like, let's just see how this thing plays out?
Yeah, exactly. Let's see. And that the Big Ten will let us know when all those games are, like late September, which makes it great to plan. I know every operation
beginning of October.
Yeah, loves it. Yeah, like 10 minutes before the first game, you'll find out exactly if and where it's going to be. No, not a ton. I mean, we know, obviously the big thing is, which teams out west were coming here and where were you going? That's really the one variable that I think all of us were curious about. And so to head out to LA, obviously no one in Minnesota, no one's going to complain about that, right? None of the basketball people are ever going to complain about the LA trip. The coaches and the staff might, but you and I aren't going to.
Nope.
No one, the fans, the parents, if they want to go, and we mentioned the airport, there's a lot of MSP to LAX flights, a lot of availability there. So I'm sure a lot of, and I'm sure they're going to have us go out there for an extended stretch, right? 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, I would assume you'll play both at the same time. Yeah,
bang those games out and get home. So not a ton. I'm always curious how they're going to figure it all out, because there are so many, new teams, and you can only have so many number of games, and you got to be respectful of those the West teams too, of how often they're going to have to travel and make these things. Like, everyone's, I think, going to be kind of winging this and learning it as we go. Yeah. But I think it's an exciting time. Just for the women's basketball space in particular, just how popular the game has become, and these players and these teams and these brands and these programs. I mean, it's just such a cool time to be involved with it. And even in our short time, Austin, think about how it's just, I think about, I just think about, being in Bloomington and watching, obviously there were no fans that time, but then seeing where that went with all the sellouts, and Iowa turning from this fun story in Iowa to this nationwide thing, Nebraska, turning, having Alexis Markowski from there and seeing how that goes. And like, it's just been fun. And we're seeing that here too with, I know ticket sales are up from a year ago. Attendance was good last year. Like, the level of excitement just for the product in general is so cool. It's so big, which I think just makes it a fun time to do what we do and be on the periphery of it.
It makes our job so much. People always say, well, I don't want to go to the game because I want to listen. I don't say all people. Like, my family says that a lot. And I'm like, no, it's more fun when the stands are full. Yeah. Like, go to the game. I think we averaged somewhere in the 4,000 to 5,000 attendance my first year. And this past year it was, oh gosh, I'm going to get it wrong now, but it was a record. I think it was certainly 5 digits.
Yeah.
So great. I mean, that's just like, it's such a growth in just 3 years. So that's what I'm so excited about. And my guess is that and again, we might not find this out until November, but we'll probably, I would guess they're going to send like UCLA and USC together to like Indiana and Purdue. Yeah. And have them flip, and then they'll go to like Minnesota, Wisconsin for a pair, or they'll go to Maryland, Rutgers for a pair. Something like that is my guess of what they're going to do.
Yeah, the old travel partner trick is what they do for the non-revenues, right? Yeah.
I think that's exactly what's going to happen at this point. All right, we've rounded out each of the ones with Dalton and Mike. I just like kind of talking about this. Your favorite spots to broadcast in the Big Ten, whether that is atmosphere, whether that is the location physically of where your broadcast is located, what you enjoy, where, like, what arenas you enjoy, just kind of putting all that together. Like, where
Sure.
are your favorite spots to go in the Big Ten?
Yeah, and I'm not sucking up to Assembly Hall, but I would put that I don't know how you feel, but I like being courtside, even though you can't see as much, because I like to feel what's happening. I like the crowd on you. I like the coaches right there. So even if you're across the way, I like being courtside because I feel like you can feel the energy, and I think that helps me. Williams Arena is a great sightline for us because we're right at midcourt, first row of the second deck. I know it's not as great for you guys. And we've got a few.
I'll stay quiet on my
Yeah, no, I understand.
Arena.
Trust me, I'm working on it. Like, we're working on it. We're trying to get it. Like, the corners are tough. We have to do that at Michigan too, right? Like, it's tough, but so do they. So, we obviously know all these reasons. Nebraska, we're still hanging on center courtside. I think they're worried about a few more premium seats coming in to knock us out of there. But we know they're gonna.
That spot.
It's a good spot, yeah. So. Yeah. But Assembly Hall to me is cool because it's, I think, the best of both worlds is that you're in the crowd, you can feel the crowd, but you're not too far removed from the emotion on the court, just right there, whatever row that is, like 4, you know what I mean? Like, it's not very far up from the bleachers. So I really like that one. And anywhere on the court to me is fine. Because I really like to feel everything that's happening around us. I think if I have a skill, it's observing other things besides what's happening. I don't think I'm a great play-by-play guy, but I think I can kind of see. I notice things when I'm there, and so that helps me when I can actually see what's what I feel like is important. So anywhere on the court is good, but Assembly Hall to me is like a great mix of both of those, and so that's why I like doing games there.
I'm biased, of course, but I do think that it's just like sometimes courtside can be almost too close.
Yeah.
And then up too high can be too far, but Assembly Hall is just a nice, like, 5 rows up. The downside, I understand, people tell me this all the time, is like you got to deal with the fans walking by you. You got to deal with the fans walking in front of you. You got to deal with a little bit of a scrunch setup, but we all got to deal with things. We have a pretty fun job. When we're complaining about that stuff, it's a little tiny violin,
Yes, exactly.
Last right. One. Just towns in general. I know with basketball trips, it's a little quicker. We're only there for a day, but do you have college towns in the Big Ten that you've enjoyed your time at?
Man, I like all of them.
There's so many good ones.
That's why I love the job. Like, that's my favorite part of it, is going to all the different towns and seeing the traditions and seeing and talking to the insiders about where to go.
Yep.
Yeah, so I because I get to do it for football too, which is great.
How long are you guys there for football?
We're just there the same thing, basically day before, night before, and then we're out right after the game. Basketball, you actually can, usually, especially if the games are at night, you can go check out, you can go see some stuff, you can go take in. I mean, I'll say this, what I really like, it's not college town necessarily, but I've really liked Maryland being in the Big Ten because I like to go to Washington, D.C., and I like to see, and that's close, obviously. So anytime we go to Maryland, I try to make it to like the National Mall or check that stuff out just because I enjoy doing that. You'll get to this age at some point too, Austin. You like to see the history things. But honestly, there's not a town that I don't. And it also depends on where we stay too.
Yes, it absolutely does.
Sometimes like Rutgers, for example, there's not a lot of great places to stay. So you're kind of, sometimes you haven't really even seen the town, but if you wanted to, hang out in New Jersey, you can. That's cool. We've done that. I mean, they all have their charms. I try to walk through all of them when I'm there. Yep. Obviously Bloomington speaks for itself. But I've also said, people ask me, what do you think about USC and UCLA being in the league? And I said, hey, I love all these towns in the Big Ten, but I've seen them a lot. I'm cool with going to Eugene for a day.
I'm excited to go to Eugene.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm cool to check. I'm cool hanging in Seattle. I'm cool, obviously, going to LA. Like, I'm sure they're going to add more teams here in the next couple of years, and this whole thing will be blown up again, and we'll go see another town. So I there's really not one that I don't enjoy going to. I kind of like, and now that I've done it for so long between football and this, like, you feel like you have your own rhythm and routine of where you're going and the food you want to eat and do all of that stuff. So to me, I don't have necessarily a favorite. I kind of like them all. I think that's
a fair answer.
A pleasure and privilege to be able to go see them all. And so And arena, same thing. I'm as a kid who grew up on the Big Ten, I love seeing all of them. It's just really fun.
I agree with that. And with baseball trips, it's nice. I get to be there for 3 or 4 days. So I try when I'm on baseball trips to really explore. We had a game canceled at Minnesota this year because it was snowing in April. So we went to the Mall of America, spent the afternoon there. Which was
there you
fun.
go. We got things for you if you need them. Yeah.
Yeah. And the tough part is you got to be, like you said, you got to stay somewhere where you could either walk somewhere or it's a cheap Uber. Because we don't have cars a lot of the times.
Right.
So
correct.
we're at the mercy of where we can get to based upon where we're staying. But
exactly right.
Justin, it's been a wonderful conversation, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I tell everybody this. I get so fired up for basketball season when I sit here and talk with you all about it because I know how much fun the Big Ten is going to be this year.
It's going to be great. Yeah. And I'm glad you're doing this. This is a cool thing. And I'm looking forward to listening and seeing what everybody else has to say too. So stay in touch and we'll see you this winter. Absolutely.
We'll keep rolling on with the team previews as we go through the summer, hoping to maybe kind of branch into some coaches and players as well. If we can make that happen, I think that'd be super cool. And one of the things I'm looking to do here is we're going to try and get some people on from our new schools, from LA, from Seattle, from Eugene, try and get the kind of the Midwest Big Ten fans antiquated with what's coming into the conference, who's joining, talking about those teams as well. So super excited for that. Again, subscribe to our podcast on both Apple and Spotify. We're also every Monday at 7:00 live on my X page at Austin Render and on our YouTube page on the Back Home Network. And then if you miss any episodes, go check them out either on the YouTube replay or on the podcast form. Whatever you prefer, we've got you covered. Thanks so much for spending another podcast with us. Again, a big thank you to Justin for joining us here today. You can catch him all season long on the Gopher Sports Network. Next Monday, we'll continue on in the summer previews of the Dribble Drive. Thanks so much for giving us another listen. We'll talk to you guys next week.